Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait just a minute or two to allow additional people to join this webinar, and then we'll get started. We'll give this just one more minute. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Curtis, and I'm the Managing Director of the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, and also a board member of the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders, or NAAHL. For those who may not be all that familiar with NAAHL, we are the only national association that brings together banks, CDFIs, and other capital providers for affordable housing and inclusive neighborhood revitalization. And on behalf of the NAAHL board, I am thrilled to welcome Sarah Brundage to NAAHL and to this conversation. So welcome, Sarah. Good afternoon, good morning for folks that are on the West Coast and Mountain States. Let's just dive right in. I see a lot of familiar names on the call and some new ones as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And yeah, thanks to everyone for joining today. Just speaking of diving in, I do feel like I just dove right into this job. So it is really nice to take the time to connect with NAAHL members in less of an urgent, policy fashion. So about myself, I consider myself an actual local. I'm in Arlington, Virginia. Arlington has been my home base, but also have lived and experienced many things. I was born in South Korea. I spent a lot of my childhood actually in West and Central Africa because my father was a foreign service officer. Went to University of Florida for my undergrad in the South for my SEC friends. Lived in California, went to Berkeley for graduate school where I met my husband, and we lived in San Francisco and Oakland and worked out in California. Have a lot of family ties to the Midwest. But Arlington is home, and that's where I live now with my husband and our two sons, Grant and Dean. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's great. And I'm just going to reveal that Sarah and I haven't really practiced this, and I'm not sure what she's how she's going to be responding to my questions.
Scripted.
So this is pretty unscripted on our parts. So you've worked primarily in affordable housing and community development in terms of your career and your career path. I'm wondering if you can tell us some of your prior experiences and how those might inform you and your new role at NAAHL.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had the fortune of working for quite a range of housing visionaries and leaders and organizations. And sometimes people joke, I don't know how you've worked for all those different people because not everyone agrees with each other. But I think that's been the fun part of my career so far is really seeing different corners and different perspectives, and all of that has definitely shaped my own views. So I started my career at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and the alumni base of the coalition is strong. Sheila Crowley has was is a mentor and was the executive director at the time, and I think she really instilled in me a foundational approach to housing policy from her experience as a social worker, of to do no harm, of connecting with the people you're serving, and just being guided by a commitment to social justice. That's what hooked me into this work and what continues to motivate me to stay in affordable housing and community development. I had a chapter in California, and I learned so much from my time there about applying equity alongside efficiency and effectiveness into policy analysis. Just was really inspired by my peers, my colleagues, community leaders, and I think doing local, regional, and state level work, it really helps you understand how federal policy trickles down. I think everyone who works in DC needs to have some experience, in a local community, dealing with town halls, dealing with the governor's office and mayors. And you just really appreciate the need for that feedback loop and to understand that policy has to be informed by practice. Um, and then I'd also, in that time had, the honor of working with Richard Rothstein. I bring this up a lot because at the time we didn't know that what a phenomenon The Color of Law would become as a book, and how it would, become part of this national dialogue, reviving how we understand our history of residential segregation. But it was a pivotal experience for me in that I don't think of housing work just as bricks and mortars, but it's a policy area through which we can and we must address racism. So that was really, I think, a critical experience for me. And then I worked at Enterprise Community Partners, who is also a NAAHL member. And that time really shaped my commitment to bipartisan policy approaches, to understanding public-private partnerships, the low-income housing tax credit. Scott Hookman learned so much about, from the business side of things, how business meets policy. And that's something that I think I'll really lean on with NAAHL. And then in my most recent chapter, it's no secret I'm coming from the Biden-Harris administration. And what a time. I had the privilege of working under, honestly, almost all female leadership, almost all women of color in particular, from Secretary Fudge to now Acting Secretary Tommen, then Chief of Staff Jen Jones, Ambassador Rice, Neera Tandem at the Domestic Policy Council, and Jenny Yang, and so many others at HUD. And just that entire chapter was inspired by the commitment to serving the American people, understanding how much it is just the utmost honor and privilege to do so, and the collective hustle and sacrifice to get as much across that finish line. That is definitely part of my work personality still. So just was an incredible chapter. And yeah, and here I am now.
Wow, it's great to hear. I know how important mentors have been in my life, and it sounds like you've had some great mentors that many of us know well. And I think you'll find being involved in all that a number of folks here will help to mentor you and to be mentored by you, because we all have different roles to play. So very exciting to get to know you better and to see those learning opportunities both ways.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm wondering what's excited you, or what did excite you about this opportunity to become NAAHL's next president and CEO?
Yeah, definitely. I did not take the decision to leave the administration lightly, but this was, an opportunity that I just knew I wanted to take. Housing is center stage in a way that it hasn't been for a long time, perhaps ever, politically at least. And unfortunately, that's born out of a crisis. But I think it presents real opportunities for us. I do believe we are collectively positioned to drive real, meaningful, lasting change to help Americans in communities nationwide, urban, rural, suburban, with housing instability and unaffordability. And I have always thought of NAAHL as one of the leading national groups to do so, one of the leading national groups in that collective effort. And as you said, NAAHL plays a unique role in terms of representing public-private partnerships, bringing together, our banking members to our CDFI nonprofit members and public partners. And that P3 partnership is the backbone of how we finance affordable housing and community development today. And so getting to represent that and, was just a huge opportunity. I will also say that NAAHL's commitment to racial equity and justice was not just appealing to me, it was mandatory. It was necessary for me to consider this role. And I felt inspired by the commitment the organization made, and really look forward to continuing to bring that commitment to life. So there's no way to talk about NAAHL, how it was a year ago, without talking about Buzz Roberts. And Buzz just had such a high impact career. I look to him as, someone who inspired me, and what he built, and getting to continue that legacy. Again, it's just an exciting time, and voters are demanding housing solutions. So I'm eager to continue the work, with NAAHL and its members.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you you talk about housing being on people's minds. I really can't think of a time that housing has been higher on the list of national priorities as it is now. And we hear that from so many quarters, and certainly both from the president himself, and it's all over the economic plan, and certainly has been a very high priority in this administration. Congress as well, Democrats and Republicans, seem to recognize that housing is a really, really critical issue that they're hearing from their constituents. Can you talk about like what you see as the opportunities here, and also maybe some of the perils?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to start with the challenges so I can end with opportunities, because I am an optimist, but there are a lot of
I like that.
challenges. Um, so I think for housing, part of the reason it's taken us a while to get to this, I guess, level of national attention is because, frankly, housing solutions take a while. It takes a while for you to actually complete a build. And often we're talking about system change in the most macro sense. So I think that will continue to be a challenge, especially as, politically and culturally, people have short attention spans. People want immediate results. And you have to be a houser, you have to be in it for the long game. We think we've all learned that. Also, there's no silver bullet. We need an above, all the above approach, a both and approach. We have a really complex housing finance system. It's hard to, I think there's an urge to be able to say, Joe will not pay more than $30 a month on insulin or whatever it is. And people are like, what's the equivalent for housing? And, there really isn't an equivalent to that. So that's just an advocacy messaging strategy for us to grapple with. And we are facing decades of underinvestment. We have a big hole to build our way out of, if you will. And lastly, I would also say, and we all know this, we encounter many misconceptions about affordable housing. We have lots of research that debunks a lot of the myths about affordable housing. I do think more and more Americans are feeling the high costs, and so there's a growing collective understanding of why this is important. But you can't talk about housing policy without understanding how entangled it is with, racism, with discrimination. And so I think, it's not an easy issue to tackle, but I love a challenge, and I think we all understand how important this is. And I think there are a ton of opportunities. I think there are more opportunities than there are challenges. I think decades of advocacy are paying off. Even in my career time, and I have a lot more career to go, I can tell a distinct, difference between when we were pitching housing in 2009 to now. I actually had the honor of, I was working at NLHC at the time, the first time that the Washington Post covered the Out of Reach report. And Emily Badger was not the big name that she is now. And it was in, I don't know if folks in DC remember the like abbreviated version that would be in the Metro that has since been canceled, which is sad. Um, and it was just very exciting. Now everyone talks about how no renter can afford an apartment. It has grown tremendously. And I think our commitment to taking a bipartisan approach is paying off. Our collective effort to build cross-sector partnerships with leaders in health and education and transportation and other economic interests is paying off. And I just always want to remind folks, it was, not that long ago, we were essentially one Senate vote away from what would have been the most massive housing package, in all of our times. And while it did get across the finish line, I really believe, every time you try, you're getting closer, and we will get across that finish line. And I hope in the near future. So again, I have a lot of optimism about what we can accomplish.
Yeah. You talked about the importance of advocacy and the impact of advocacy a couple minutes ago. And I want to talk about how NAAHL comes into that, and some of your vision for NAAHL's future and the kind of impact that we can have. But I also want to start to invite people to ask their own questions. And there is a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully you can see that, and you could post a question there. You could also try raising your hand, and we'll see if that works. But if you post your questions, I've got a couple more, but I'd love to bring more people into this conversation as well. So let's talk about NAAHL. And could you talk about your top priorities in the short run, and
Yeah.
where you think we should be focusing our efforts?
So first and foremost, my priority is to do as many one-on-one meetings with our members. And so, if you haven't heard from me yet, you'll be hearing from me soon. I am working my way through the NAAHL membership, and just been incredibly impressed with everyone I've been able to connect with thus far. I am eager to hear about members' businesses, priorities, challenges, how NAAHL can be most helpful to you. And I'm about to kick off quite a tour. I'm going to the Bay Area just next week, New York City, Boston, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Atlanta, Florida later this year. So if you are in one of those areas and want to meet, please send me a note. We're doing our best to reach out to as many folks as possible. And this will just be the first round. I hope to do this annually. I would also flag in Chicago, NAAHL's board and sustaining members meeting will be there July 9th to the 10th. And we're going to announce, and so folks can look out for this. We're going to do our first NAAHL members and friends networking social. So when we're out in the field, we really want to, flex NAAHL's convening power and create spaces for our members and just our broader network to connect with each other. But beyond really getting this face time with members, in the immediate in DC, I think all hands are on seeing if a tax package will come together. These things tend to happen last minute. While things aren't looking great, you never know. And the tax package would hopefully include some key provisions from the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which would take really, really impactful steps to expand the low-income housing tax credit. But after that, honestly, I do view 2024 as getting ready for 2025. And that's making sure and all that we are as sophisticated as possible and being prepared for that. It'll be a new beginning for all of us potentially. Either way, it next year is going to be they're calling it the 2025 tax Super Bowl. So there's a lot of exciting policy work and advocacy brewing, and that's a big focus of mine, is just getting ready for that.
Great. It's an exciting plan. Look forward to seeing you in Boston.
Yeah.
I love that you want to take some of your work and the vision that NAAHL is doing around the country and meet individually with people. So I look forward to continuing that conversation. I have discovered an allow to talk button that has become available. So if you do have any questions for Sarah, please feel free to raise your hand and we can get those questions in, or you can post a question in the Q&A using that button. Sarah, while we're waiting for questions, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your longer term vision for NAAHL. So you talked about kind of the short term ground game and some of the short-term priorities, including the tax bill. What do you see longer term as high priorities for NAAHL?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something I'm thinking about, every day as I'm learning more from our members. Longer term, NAAHL is known for our leadership in our CRA policy work, the Community Reinvestment Act, and I think that will absolutely continue. But more broadly, I do see NAAHL as the leading voice of lenders, public-private partnerships, and just general policy expert on finance tools at some broader tables. And I think I'm looking forward to ensuring that NAAHL has that flexibility to bring our expertise, not to just specific policy priorities, but to bigger thematic conversations about longer term visions, and giving us that nimbleness to jump when there are policy windows. So I see a lot of the work kind of in three big buckets: housing supply, and again, these are all spaces we live in, but really broadening our efforts, wealth building and economic development. And so, long term, I think it's just continuing to build on what NAAHL already is, which is, a voice that policymakers, regardless of the political landscape, come to for trusted, practice informed, evidence-based policy solutions. But again, it's hard to know what the world will look like in 1 year, yet alone 5, 10, 15. But I think NAAHL again will be that source for that policy expertise, in those spaces.
Yep, yep, that's great. I I'm aware that it's an election year and that it's especially hard to get things done during an election year. And there's a lot of paralysis in DC. And you're an experienced DC operator. You've seen it from a number of different perspectives. I'm wondering if you could talk about what it's like to navigate that, and what it's like to navigate that, in an election year, and from your position at NAAHL, like, how do you approach that challenge?
Yeah. I think it is, I think this is a town that appreciates honesty and an ability to work with people regardless of where they're coming from. And that's how I approach the work. So I do think there's a lot that can still get done or will get done. A lot of huge announcements have come out of the administration, and it's upon the advocates to continue to engage folks. Obviously, we're closely monitoring what's happening with CRA, but I do know several big housing rules like are expected to come out, in the next month or so. We're still awaiting the affirmatively furthering for housing rule, the proposed home rule, and I expect both of those to come out before the end of May. And then again, to see if a tax package can come together and you have your annual appropriations work. So it's still a busy time in that sense, but yeah, an election year brings a lot of uncertainty, and slowly a lot of policy brains move into campaign land. And there's a good healthy separation typically, with campaign versus usual business. But again, I think it's about putting the mission first, putting the members first. I never hide like what my interests are, and that's to drive equitable housing solutions. But I really pride myself on ability to work well with everyone. I've started, for me, it's a lot about reconnecting with folks in my new capacity. So I did some of my first meetings on the Hill, and the first offices I met with were Senator Scott's banking committee staff and Senator Young's office. So I think again, maintaining really strong bipartisan relationships is important, and people want solutions. You do have to put the politics aside because our work, it should not be politicized, in my opinion. So yeah, and I think again, regardless of what happens in November, there could be a change in the executive branch, there could not be, but I definitely expect some changes in Congress. There's the potential for both chambers to flip, so we would still have a split Congress, just in a different way. But regardless of the scenario, NAAHL will be advancing policy priorities, will be nimble, will be flexible. At our core, I know we have a policy platform that will advance under any political landscape, and you just have to be strategic about it. But again, I think that's why NAAHL's been effective and will continue to be.
Yep. Talking about people's desire to be making an impact in the issues that are first and foremost in people's minds right now. Climate is one of those. And I see that Noelle Lentz from Wood Forest has posted a question about are thinking about the EPA grant awards.
Yes.
And the impact that influx of capital is going to have in the market. So definitely something
Yes.
that a number of us have been thinking about.
Yeah, and big congratulations to folks. A lot of NAAHL members in the mix. We had CPC, OFN, Enterprise, and LISC, I believe. Talk about transformative funding. I know when you get funding that scale, everyone is celebrating and also taking probably a deep breath of like, oh my goodness, here we go. We got what we asked for. But all those organizations have visionary leadership and really deep benches in terms of staff capacity. I have the utmost confidence in their plans to deploy it. I just think the coalitions that were born out of this opportunity are incredible. I think this funding is going to transform our field. It will transform people's businesses. But I think what we are seeing shifting is the inevitable marriage that we needed to see between energy and climate investments with housing. And that's how we think about preservation as well as new production. And frankly, it's, to speak candidly, my husband works in renewable energy, and it's so interesting. We both come from we both have experience with tax credits. He's a lot more on the finance side, but it is a really different field than ours. There is so much cash, there's so much opportunity. The investors are really hungry for deals. Their capital stack is simpler, so it'll be interesting how the housing space absorbs this influx. But I'm also curious if we're going to learn or have with these new resources an opportunity to think about streamlining how our finance models work a bit, because again, like a capital stack for a large scale renewable energy development is two sources, three, it's just completely different than us. So I think it's hard to predict what will happen, but I think it could really be a growth opportunity for us. Definitely
Yeah.
the communities we serve, the more we can streamline these sources of funding to drive solutions that achieve all our policy goals, the better.
Well, we're all excited about the impact that these new resources will bring and how we're going to find the most effective ways to deploy them. And now we'll be right in the middle of that. I see that we are just at time right now, so really appreciate this conversation and the energy that you bring to NAAHL and to all of these policy conversations. Want to thank everyone who is attending for participating and for your interest. And we welcome you to follow NAAHL, to be in touch. If you're in the neighborhood and want Sarah to pay a visit on her road trips, then feel free to reach out and let her know. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Bye bye. Thanks, everyone.